All right, welcome everyone to our workshop on exploring intersectionality in the classroom. And I was just kind of wondering, maybe show of hands or something in the chat. How many administrators do we have with us today? How many department chairs or deans were able to join us? I know that we're asking you to invite your department chair or deans over the next few months. And so it would be lovely if we had some today, but no worries. That we've got some other wonderful webinars coming up, one each month through June. So there's lots of opportunities. And let's see, do we have any department chairs? Okay, well, all right. Well, great. I see some of you want to do that next month. So very quickly, our agenda today is we are going to have our workshop in just a moment, but we're going to talk a little bit about the program and what's coming up in terms of spring reflections that all of you participants will be doing. To share your work, and then we'll talk about the other spring webinars real quickly, and then we will get to Andre Chen Feng, who is our workshop facilitator today. Any questions before we move forward? All right.
Sorry, I'll just point out, we do have a couple of folks in the chat identifying themselves as chairs, so we're so thrilled that they're here.
Oh, wonderful. Super. Okay. All right, James, did you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Una. So as a reminder for everybody who's here, but especially for folks who might be participating in one of our activities for the first time, we'll just give you a quick bullet level view of the Open for Anti-Racism program. And we're so pleased that so many folks from around the state are participating in this. The overall vision of the Open for Anti-Racism program, or OFAR, is for our participants to explore how to use OER, Open Educational Resources, and Open Pedagogy as tools to make their instructional materials and teaching anti-racist. Again, the focus is on anti-racism. In the course that participants completed in the fall, they learned about anti-racism and anti-racist pedagogy, as well as OER and Open Pedagogy. Our participants developed an action plan to change something, improve something in their classes in the spring. So our participants are just embarking upon that adventure right now throughout the program. We hope that our participants are benefiting from peer connections, coaching, webinars, and workshops like this. And then we're doing a lot to document the impact, surveys of the faculty, surveys of students, interviews with a select number of folks, and working with your institutional research departments to look at the impact on student learning outcomes over a longer period of time. So there's quite a bit involved here. We appreciate everybody's energy. And next slide, and just one more slide on sort of what we're aiming to do. So again, we really are focusing on anti-racism, and we have a working definition of anti-racist pedagogy. This is done in all humility and evolving. And we hope and expect that this will change over time. But as a working definition, we view anti-racist pedagogy as one that is race conscious, acknowledging identity and positionality, recognizing that bias, implicit bias exists, thinking systemically and structurally, exposing systemic racism, and absolutely examining the history of the discipline, which asks us to question the voices and the knowledge, whose knowledge is in and whose knowledge is left out, right? And who's defining the terms in our disciplines, and in a positive way, including more voices, including more perspectives, and tying this to the open aspect, inviting students to contribute their own experiences, their own perspectives, and co-create, co-curate some of our materials. So thank you for that, and back to you, Una.
All right, thanks very much, James. And actually, I know that I believe Joy or Kim are here, but we do have a spring reflection exercise coming up, and that's due in the middle of the month here. Joy or Kim, do you want to speak to these questions that folks will be answering in their reflection?
Joy? Okay, thank you, Kim. I'm happy to. Excuse me. These questions were really developed in collaboration with our coaches. So I really want to say a big thank you to our coaches who really helped us shape these questions. Really, at this point, we know you're all probably still relatively early in your implementation process. So these questions are really just like a checking in and an opportunity for all of the participants really to hear from each other and check in with each other to just see how it's going for each of you. You know, there are some specific questions here about how your implementation of your action plan addresses anti-racism, but also wondering if anything has been surprising. Have you encountered any challenges yet? Sort of what are your next steps? So we will be posting these discussion questions in the Canvas course in a discussion, and we'll send some announcements too to remind you all. But it's also a really nice opportunity as a larger group to just kind of get a sense of what everyone's doing and how their progress is going. So stay tuned. You can see that in the Canvas course soon.
Thanks so much, Joy. So I want to just remind you that today is Intersectionality in the Classroom workshop. And I'll just read really briefly here. Intersectionality refers to how an individual or group social category supports categories such as race, class, and gender are interconnected and create overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or privilege. And so Andre is going to take us through an experiential learning experience in just a few moments. And you'll have an opportunity to go into small groups and reflect on your own intersectionality and how that reflects itself in the classroom with both you and your students. So we're really excited to have this workshop. And I want to just mention a little bit of his bio. He's an advocate for healing-centered education, currently a PhD student at Claremont Graduate University, focusing on integrating contemplative practices and critical theories into higher education, specifically liberation-based healing with teacher educators of color. He's a lot of other great stuff. I think one of the things I admire most about Andre is, number one, he's a graduate of Pasadena City College. And yay, Pasadena. We've got a team here from Pasadena. And he taught 7th and 8th grade mathematics for 12 years in Los Angeles. And he's still standing up. I mean, can you imagine teaching math to middle schoolers? I mean, I'm sure it was wonderful, but I can imagine it was also very interesting. And he talks a little bit about his family. He's got 2 youngsters who are doing well. So really excited to have Andre with us. So just a reminder, we've got webinars coming up every month. We have moved the June one, so I want you to note that your showcases of your projects, your team's projects, will be on June 17th. So we had to move that due to some scheduling problems. So it's a little bit later, and you'll get your Zoom registration will be updated to reflect that. So you don't have to do anything to change your registration. And James, did you want to mention just really quickly about the one that's coming up in March?
Yes, Una, thank you very much. So in March, we're really looking forward to hearing from a colleague, Jarrell Hill, who is Dean of the School of Education at Pacific Oaks College, another Pasadena shout out there. He will talk about how the School of Education at Pacific Oaks College is infusing equity, but also explicitly anti-racism in their teacher training so that they're preparing future teachers to go into their classrooms, into classrooms in our communities with an anti-racist perspective. And also he'll describe how they're utilizing some OER and open education tools in that training, including one that we heard about from our colleagues with OER Commons last month. So it'll be a lot of very practical information, but also I think really inspiring to see, like, you know, there are other institutions doing this, like it's part of what they do. So I think that's going to be really inspiring. Thanks, Una.
Thank you, James. All right, just a quick reminder that if you need help with OER, the kind of the nuts and bolts, the OER team at College of the Canyon stands by, and there's an email address there that you can contact them to set up some time. And also there's recordings available in Canvas. They're also here linked, but they're in your Canvas course for the 8, I think it was 8, right? 8 different workshops that were offered in January, if you want to review those as well. And I think that's it, except for we are going to ask you at the end, and we'll pop, Liz or I will pop that into the chat window. We probably both will, to ask you. We really appreciate your feedback. Thank you for the feedback you sent to us on the January workshops. That's been very helpful. And we are now going to turn it over to Andre, and I will stop sharing. All right, Andre,
Yeah, all right. I was just loading the slides.
No,
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Una, James, and the team for welcoming and offering space for our former alum and also adjunct. Shout out to PCC. The community college space, I really feel like allowed me to flourish as a formerly undocumented student and first-gen college student. Even though I'm Asian American and the body I'm in, I think a lot of people assume that because now I teach at the graduate school, people have a lot of assumptions of who I am and what I do. But I wanted to say that if it wasn't for PCC, specifically the direction of Brock Klein and College One and STEM Pathways, that was such a powerful experience for me just to be part of a small learning community. So today's talk is on intersectionality in the classroom, considerations for anti-racism. And my hope for this session is that we're not only thinking about like cognitive work, and I think sometimes when we do equity and social justice work, there's a lot of thinking and awareness, but I also want to bring us back to in our own bodies. How does our bodies feel about this work? How do we show up in the bodies that we're in? So I want to invite you to really notice the discomfort, the comfort, the things that you're resonating with, and the things you might be resisting. So to help us do that, I want to ask all you all to kind of get together. If you can stand up, we're going to do a practice called a minute to arrive. And before I start any class at community colleges or graduate schools or with K-12, we ask all the kiddos from babies to adults, if y'all can just stand up, go ahead and stand up. And we just want to invite you to take a moment to just stretch and focus on your body. We've been living in the Zoom land for 2 years. It's been difficult for a lot of us with young children, pets included. So just take a moment to breathe. You need to roll out your shoulders. If you want to shake out your hands. And I really want to just invite you to inhale through your nose, take a deep breath. Pause, and then exhale through your mouth. Try that one more time. I'm going to just inhale, take another deep breath through your nose. Pause, and then exhale through your mouth. And I want to invite you to come sit back down. If you want to stay standing, that's also cool. I don't mind. Feel free to use the chat and share, like, how did that feel? Was that super awkward? Was that super comfortable? Are some of you falling asleep already? Like our students? Or like, what's going on through your mind? Is this presentation like, man, when is he gonna get to intersectionality? Or is it like, oh, this is the pace, I like this. This is cool. This is not a typical professional learning. Like how are we navigating this space? So of course, I always want to offer up a land acknowledgement. And I'm currently occupying the Tonga territory next to Claremont and Upland. And land acknowledgement, for me, the first step is basically saying that I'm occupying this land. I recognize the impact of historical trauma and dispossession and ongoing systemic inequities. I acknowledge the relationship of care that these indigenous nations continue to maintain with this land. I celebrate their resilience and strength then and now, and express my ongoing commitment to dismantle silence histories based on colonialism in our section and our communities. And I know that today's talk is not on settler colonialism, but if you want to think about white supremacy, anti-racism, we have to think about patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, and also anti-Blackness. So I just want to kind of put that on the radar for us to think about as we deepen our understanding of Blackness and anti-Blackness, how do we also understand not just the theft of labor, but also the theft of land? I'll drop this in the resource. It's a native land that you can kind of find out where you are, where you're located, depending on where you're located and what land you're occupying. So one of the first activities I want to invite you all to do is an inclusion activity. And the prompt is, if you really knew me, you would know. You're going to be in groups of 10, and each of you will have about a minute to share. And after everyone shares, discuss how did that feel and what did you notice in your body? So I'll model this. If you really knew me, you would know that I'm a twin. Both my twin brother Andrew and Andre, we graduated from Pasadena City College. Unfortunately, he went to USC. I went to UCLA twice for my undergrad and my master's. My older brother also went to USC. This is my wife, Dr. Jessica Chen Feng. She's an assistant director of physician vitality at Loma Linda, and she offers wellness and physician checks for the residents and doctors there. This is my 4.5-year-old son, Justice. He's also learning about anti-racism and ethnic studies across the kitchen table. This is our beautiful daughter. She's not this young now, she's 11. So she's throwing Cheerios, Mum-Mums. I have stains all over my new shirt, but it's a blast. It's a blast. I think one other thing that if you really knew me, you would know that I started my PhD program because of mental health reasons. And this is a content warning, so some of you might get activated. My former best friend in high school died by suicide. And then 10 years later, one of my close friends, he also died by suicide on the day of his college graduation. Both of these men, youth, were men of color, Asian American. And I think when I started the doctoral work, I really wanted to think about mental health preventions in schools. What was it that schools were not addressing that so many youths of color were taking their own lives? But very quickly, as I learned about mental health, I realized that a lot of the research was done about white people and not about people of color. And even when people of color are talking about psychological research, it's through a white Eurocentric lens. The epistemology and ontologies are very Eurocentric. So I decided to kind of go into this space and think about teacher educators of color. We'll pause there. Maybe we can take a breath. I'm going to invite Liz, if you can help me as a host. We're going to break up into groups. And the prompt again is, if you really knew me, you would know. Think about that. Only share what's comfortable for you, especially as Black, Indigenous people of color. This is not you don't have to take the space to share all of your vulnerabilities. I want to make it clear that I only share what you're comfortable with. Right? So we'll take about 15 minutes for that. And I'll see you back here in a bit. Take a breath. I actually feel a lot of tightness around my stomach. I don't know if it's the breakfast I didn't eat or it's my nerves for my stress. But I kind of want to just take about a minute and offer up some space. How did that feel for you all? You can kind of jump in on the chat. You can definitely use the emoji icons. What did you notice about yourself? Anybody brave enough to unmute? I don't want to be the person that calls on people because
I'll unmute.
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. I think it was a great activity because it was like elevating an icebreaker. And what I really liked about it is I've seen all these names, but the group I was with, I don't think, other than Joy, I don't think I've spoken to anyone in that group yet. So it was really cool to be in a group of new people that I've known for months now, or known of, and simultaneously be with people that are new to me, and be in a group where some people felt safe enough to share some like really deep things. And like, so I felt like in that 5 minutes, I got to know people just as I would if we were having a beer somewhere or something, like for 3 hours. So it was really good.
Wow, I love it. Time traveling, vulnerability. I love it. Beer also, why not? Jeff, I'm gonna ask you to call on someone else. That's what I learned at PCC. One of the professors said he didn't like calling on others, so he made the students who responded call on other kids, and I was like, oh my gosh. So Jeff, you have the honor of doing that.
That's absolutely brutal. Okay, challenge accepted. I'm obviously going to pick on someone from my school. Let's hear from the man himself, Omar Gonzalez. Jenny, I would have picked you, but I saw Omar's bright shining smile.
Yeah, it was cool in our group too. It was awesome to hear about everybody's different like disciplines and what they're focused on, and getting to know everybody, and then also connecting right with different topics, such as in our group we're talking a lot about music and some of the interdisciplinary aspects of research or focuses, and that was pretty great and awesome. Got to learn a little bit about everybody. Sorry if there's a little background noise. Let me go ahead and pick someone. Let's go with, just gonna look at my screen here. Kendra, sounded familiar from our group in one of my groups.
Was it Keandra? Was it me? Yes. Okay. I thought it was really great. I was in the group with Jeff, and Jeff really expressed a lot of how I felt. I think that we had a chance to connect. There was some vulnerability. There were also some little bright moments of learning and inspiration and sharing back and forth. So there was exchange, and there was a little bit of talk about music too. Jeff likes heavy metal, and so I think we got a lot accomplished. And I am going to pick on Jennifer because that hat is so beautiful in your picture.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, our group was great. And that activity is really nice because people were able to make connections really quickly on a, kind of deeper level, where we talked about liking sports and liking music. So you kind of could, as an icebreaker, that would be something where you can kind of have that instant bonding moment. Let's see, I'm going to...
Sorry, Jennifer, to cut you off. We're actually going to transition because I think we can share for a lot longer, but yeah. I also want to be mindful of some of the other activities and offerings that I want to share with y'all. So sorry to cut you off, Jennifer.
No problem.
I think one of the pieces I want to share is that anytime we offer some pedagogical activities or instructional practices, there are going to be folks, like a lot of people who are sharing, they're very comfortable, right? And there's also going to be some folks that are not comfortable, and there will be some folks in between. And I want to just be able to name that sometimes in community college spaces, the professor shows up, but the person doesn't. And right now in this space, at least in our group, in group one, there was a lot of showing up. And I guess one of the questions, if you're taking notes, is how do I show up in my classroom? Does Una show up, or is it Professor Daly that shows up? How do we show up in our classrooms? And I think a part of this for me that I'm learning a lot about is, when do I take off my mask? when do I actually get to see my own face reflected in the classroom? Because as an Asian American, formerly undocumented, 1.5 generation Taiwanese American, like the more that I wear my mask, the more that I assimilate to whiteness, the more that I use my social capital, the more that I can achieve, the more efficient it is for me. And I have to really be clear about what is the language I want to share. How do I want to conduct my class in a way that's liberatory? Or is my classroom content driven? And not that you can't have one or the other, but I think sometimes the content and the sense of urgency, many times I think about, oh my gosh, I need to cover this, I need to cover this, I need to cover this. And it's just like, I just feel like my spirit's caught between like a rock and a hard place. It's like the Indiana Jones boulder in the wall of spikes. And I just feel like I can never do what I want to do. And there's this pressure cooker happening. Even when I'm laying down in my bed about to go to sleep, there's a pressure cooker. It's not like an Instapot. It's like a pressure cooker. It's like I have to grade, I have to write, I have to blah, blah, blah. And like I have to meet with my students, I have to do advising, blah, blah, blah. There was this committee I don't want to be a part of. There's a lot of things going on. So I think I just want to really name that the psychological safety that's required. I think it was afforded to us because we're adults, but that's not always the case with adults and also with our students. So I also want to just kind of amplify, a lot of us actually touched on our own positionalities, and that actually really nicely segues to our topic today about intersectionality. So I want to definitely invite you to use that prompt in your own classroom. We hope that anything you see and hear and experience and feel, you feel comfortable to bring back. So it's already been an hour, Una. That's why I asked for extra time, because I know our sessions are always longer and it feels more rich. And we're just starting the agenda. So I'm gonna have to make some pedagogical decisions here, but we centered with our micro practice. We connected with ourselves and with each other. At this point, we're gonna share, I'll have some offering to share. We'll see if there's some time for planning and then there's some time for reflection. I will make the slides available after the session. Please don't share it with others, but happy to, you can definitely share it with on your own and some of the folks who missed the session. But there's been a lot of, let's just say, challenges talking about race and racism in our higher ed spaces, not so much in California, but there's been a lot of pushback. Today, I invite you to learn to discuss and explore specifically around identity and intersectionality, power and privilege, and systems of oppression. Those are my intentions for today. I think we're gonna get to the identity part and maybe highlight intersectionality. Power and privilege, systems of oppression, we'll see how much we can highlight. Agreements, I really wanna name these parts, trust and intent and name the impact. Take care of yourself and notice what your body needs. If you need some hydration, please do so. If you need to stand up and stretch, turn off camera, turn on camera, do what you need. Feel free to make suggestions politely. Make space, take space. And ultimately, I think something I want to say really loud and clear, there's no shame, there's no guilt. Can y'all see my slides?
Actually, Andre, we're not seeing your slides. I was just going to mention that to you.
Wah, wah, wah.
Now we can, but I think I hate to speak for others, but I think it was fairly clear, the concepts you were sharing.
Great. I was just testing your auditory. Okay, great. Thank you. I forgot who said that you can't see. So you gotta speak up. You gotta let me know. But I want to really say, like, there's no shame, there's no guilt, and there's no fixing. Sometimes in the anti-oppressive spaces, we think about like, oh, we should be here by now. Like, we should be pedagogically mature. We should have developed these awarenesses by now. But I want to be able to say this to you all, like, all of us come from different experiences, geographically, generationally, economically, socially. So you are where you need to be. And if you're feeling some shame, let shame and guilt be a place that you visit, but not a place you stay. Shame and guilt is a place that you can visit, but not a place you stay. You can cite Brene Brown. Those are not my words. You can follow Brene Brown on her Instagram. She's just dropping gems all day. She's just dropping gems about awareness. Lastly, use a chat to respond, post questions, and amplify any discussions. I have the task of talking about intersectionality, but I want to kind of zoom back a little bit and talk about the different pieces. We have to acknowledge the system that we're in. So there's this big ideological culture of white supremacy. Within that, we have what Bell Hooks calls white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, capitalism. So each of those are big buckets to kind of untangle and understand and see how all of those intersects. We'll also have to think about racism, specifically anti-Blackness, and we also talked about settler colonialism a little bit. So those are kind of the main pieces as you do your racial justice journey. You want to kind of think about, okay, I'm leveling up about anti-Blackness right now, cool. How do I understand ethnic studies? How do I understand capitalism? How do I understand patriarchy? Because each of these pieces are feeding one another and reinforcing one another. Developing an intersectional approach is a rocket fuel for our racial justice journey. It's really important that as researchers, as scholars, as parents, as professors, that we have an intersectional approach to understanding our own racial justice journey. We'll unpack that a little bit more. So I'll kind of just offer my own story about who I am, and hopefully this can kind of share with you how can you take an intersectional approach in your own classroom. I can't talk about pedagogy without talking about who I am, and I can't talk about who I am without talking about power. So this is something really simple that I offer up anytime I do a presentation with kindergartners all the way to like district superintendents or higher education, deans, faculty. I always offer up a slide about myself because I want to locate to myself my own identity, to all the politicals, histories, to the various dynamic systems that I'm part of. So I love Kobe and Gigi, rest in power. Quick story about Charlotte's Web. I immigrated to the States when I was 9. And my 4th grade teacher gave me this book. It's Charlotte's Web, both in English and Mandarin. But at that time, when I immigrated from Taiwan to the States, I was still learning to read and not reading to learn. For the longest time, I thought Charlotte was a girl. And I obviously didn't pass the reading comprehension test that year. And then several years later, when I was in 7th grade, I was watching a trailer for the movie Charlotte's Web, and I realized, oh my gosh, Charlotte, it's the spider. And then the whole story made more sense. But it gets better. So 15 years later, I'm teaching, like I'm in my 8th or 9th year teaching in Koreatown. I'm teaching middle school math. I'm introducing this slide, something similar. And I tell the story about Charlotte's Web. And I say like, Charlotte is the spider, not the girl. And then you can hear this audible gasp, like, oh my goodness, Mr. Chen Feng, really? I thought she was the girl. And I almost fell out of my seat. I was like, 15 years later, our English language instruction is still struggling. And so I always want to tell that story. That's my mom's, rest in power, Linda. She passed away from cancer 13 years ago. That's my twin brother who went to USC. That's my older brother who also went to USC. They both didn't get into USC. I'm just kidding. No, they didn't apply. They were business majors. That's my pops in Taiwan. I went to South Pass, did 3 years at PCC, went to UCLA for my undergrad and grad, and then now I'm in my 7th year of my PhD program. No shame. I had 2 kids along the way, bought a house in a pandemic. So I'm trying to give myself room to breathe and trying to finish this program. I'm constantly navigating my intersectionality of being Taiwanese, being American, because in one space or in the other, I always feel like I'm not enough of one or the other. These are students I've been mentoring since 7th grade. They're like college seniors and graduated from college already, but they're former middle school students I've been mentoring since 7th grade. So it's been a journey. They're called the Wooden Scholars of Color. So I kind of want to pause right there. As you show up with your whole self, like Parker Palmer talks about this phrase, we teach who we are. He has this book, like 25th anniversary, called The Courage to Teach. We teach who we are. And I often wonder, like, what would it have been like for me to actually teach with my whole self starting in year 1? I didn't start teaching in this like way until maybe halfway through my K-12 career. I think it was like year 7, year 8, I was really able to let go of the myth of meritocracy and really starting to understand like education is more than a collection of like content standards. And even though the students were getting like off the chart state test scores, fantastic, but there's something about that content coverage that was dehumanizing on my part. I felt like there was pedagogical malpractice. I stressed the kids out. And I really believe that if they worked hard enough and pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps, that they can achieve anything. I kept on saying that over and over. And now I realize, like, damn, it's not about the individual. It's not even about the interpersonal. It's not about the institutional. There's an ideological oppressive system that's at play at all times. And how do I understand the micro intersecting with the macro? So I share all this with you just to say that when you show up on your first day of class, I really encourage you, before you take out the syllabus, before you throw that 15-pager down and introduce all the things you're supposed to do and cover, before all the anxiety and the hearts drop to the floor, like talk about yourself, let the students talk to each other. Day 1 of your classroom shouldn't be like demoralizing. And I'm saying not for the students, for the teachers. I think the faculty, sometimes we forget to look in the mirror. You're like, shit. Oh, I mean, oops, I don't know. Can I use profanity, Una? I don't, okay.
No, you're not allowed to.
I'm not allowed to? That's so oppressive.
I went to Catholic school. We don't allow that.
Just like, I think being really honest, sometimes when I had to teach those syllabus, I had to get my dean, my chair's approval. I felt like, oh my goodness, I can't teach this in 18 weeks or 16 weeks. There's no way. Do you know the students coming in, there's so many different gaps, there's so many different things I have to navigate. So I think on day 1, if you're able to build connections, establish that psychological safety with something really simple, a really practical tip, I pre-create 20 slides like this. I type all the students' names on their slide, and I send this PowerPoint to the students on Google Slides, and they all just drop pictures from Instagram, TikTok, I don't know what they use these days, and they get to showcase themselves with a couple of images. And the first day of class, they're just introducing themselves and talking with one another. And then after I have their attention, that's when I drop the syllabus on them. And then they're like, what the heck? And I'm like, oh, we'll talk about this next week. Marinate on this, chew on it a little bit. And then I respond to some questions on Canvas, and then I peace out. And then, but at least like they feel connected, and then there's a burden of the syllabus, but the week 2, that's when we kind of really hit the ground running. I want to pause there a little bit. Are there any questions, comments, or feedback, protests about that approach? I know week 1 is really, really pivotal, but I know that 90% of the professors start with the syllabus. Is that resonating with you on the chat?
I think between what you're saying now and our last meeting, every time I look at my syllabus now, I'm just depressed. Like, I feel like I thought I was so, like, it was such a good syllabus. And then these last 2 meetings, I'm like, man, this syllabus is still pretty shit. So thanks.
Yeah, Jeff is referring to the fact that a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Amy Nussbaum in talking about how to make your syllabi more welcoming and collaborative with your students.
And I'm bringing that up because not only is it not as welcoming as it should be, I do also start with it on the first day. So it's just, this is a good meeting. Thank you.
Others? Want to definitely invite voices. sometimes in the Asian American community, I need permission to speak. So I want to call out all the Asian Americans or other folks that might like, you need permission to speak. This is your time. Unmute yourself or anybody like who hasn't shared yet, feel free to just jump in. This is a space for us to kind of, it's like a pedagogical playground here. It's like a sandbox. Nobody's going to cancel you. Maybe in their hearts, but not.
I'll speak. This is Roxanne from Imperial Valley College. I know that there's a very fine line with taking on your mask, putting off your, or taking on your mask, or I'm sorry, putting on your mask, taking off your mask there. When it comes to certain classes, I know each class that I've had has been very unique. So in some instances, when I do have part of me and my personality come out, there is always a level of, okay, but I'm still the authority figure here. So let's just all respect each other equally. Let's speak, as best as we can. And then there's some that, will subscribe to that. And then there's others that will take it a bit farther, or there are actually other, I guess, administration, faculty and such that says, this isn't the way it should be. And I feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place sometimes, because I'm wanting to reach out and I'm wanting to be that person that they can trust. But then I've also have administration coming in and saying, you are their professor, you are not their friend. So, again, it's like a fine line. So I'm still trying to find that balance. And that's the risk of me being canceled right now. Just speaking freely. Thank you.
Oh, Andre, may I reflect on what Roxanne just said?
Of course, you don't have to ask permission. This is.
Oh, no, I raised my hand. I wasn't sure if I was jumping in, but I do want to say that Roxanne is reflecting something that, a reality is that we do work for an institution and there is a power dynamic at play, right? So we do have to some degree follow a script, because if you do not follow that script, that when they evaluate you, they will question, why are you doing it that way? You shouldn't do it that way. And in fact, one of the reasons why I wanted to so badly participated and be chosen into this is that I've been teaching my class from an anti-racist framework for quite a while. All the other, only one time, and this is an outlier, one out of the other evaluations I've been had, I needed room for improvement. So what I really want from this is I need a certificate having institutional support from organizations like this, that this is possible. Because if I had one more, because then, and the other time, I can say, when I got low evaluations, they wanted to see another one, and I gave a classic textbook, patriarchally, oozing with patriarchal dictates, lesson on American government. I kid you not, but I got high marks. You see what I'm saying? So Roxanne is really reflecting, I think, a reality, particularly at adjuncts who have no power whatsoever, right? I mean, that's a real, and financial precarity is something that we always think about. Anyways, I'm done. Thank you.
I so appreciate that, Christine, Roxanne, and I'll be totally transparent with you all. This is why, Una, I didn't want to make this recording public. I'll just say one of the institutions I was at, and I've been at several, I taught a class on like racial justice and the science of learning. And basically the text that I was given was basically all like by white male authors. And then I was just thinking, oh my goodness, how do I kind of offer different voices, right? And I taught the course, I integrated like racial justice literacy. And then some of out of the 20 grad students, they're all going to become teachers. They felt like, a group of them felt like, oh, I love this. This is exactly what I wanted to learn about. And then other folks were like, what the hell? Why are we talking about racial justice? Isn't this a psychology and science of learning? Why are we talking about like diversity, equity, inclusion? And I just got ripped apart on the evals. And at that moment, I realized, oh my goodness, like, when was the last time that these graduate students had an Asian American professor? When was the last time they had an Asian American male professor, not in STEM? And I had to think really carefully, like, after I kind of just like locked into that evaluations, I put on my pedagogical armor and I was like, raising my fist to the air and saying like, I'm not going to talk about critical pedagogical racial logics, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to be liberatory. And I thought I have all these like negative thoughts, and I was just like swirling, downward spiraling. And I quickly realized, man, that's how elegant the system is. Like the system reproduces itself and protects itself. Like it demoralizes us as educators, and then we're forced to teach and get towards the system. So I think all I just to say, Christine, if you're able to talk to your deans or chairs, find people part of your village that you can connect with, or spaces like this, to be really honest, because it was really difficult.
Andre, they are the village. You know what I mean? They need this, right? I think the fact that this is very ironic. What's great about this is that we find each other, but I don't think we necessarily need this type of training to fine tuning, no doubt. But the point being that institution, not that I'm, being too critical, we're just saying, it is the village that is oppressing me. Not all, it was just that one institution. That's why I need a certificate at the end of this saying that I know what I'm talking about, because the degree is not even enough to prove that I have content expert in the matter. You see what I'm saying? I just want to say that too, right? I mean, I know that we will circumnavigate what we can, right? We will do our best to toe that line. I mean, all the world's a stage, right? I don't always like Shakespeare, but he got that right. It is all performative, and then we'll do our best to, when they're not evaluating, I'll do whatever I want. On the syllabus, I will say whatever they want. But in the classroom, you have to do reading, I will interject. Okay, so let me teach this from a critical perspective. This is a traditional one, you know what I mean? And that's why you're broke, and that's the common ground, right? Racism also leads to people being broke. Thank you.
Speaking truth, snap, snap. I also want to give a shout out. I know this is an awkward transition, Christine, so I'm into the group, but I got to transition. Una's giving me the eye. She's like, Andre, gotta get to the content, Yeah, all right. I can feel that, Una. I can feel it.
Well, Andre, I think we might not have time for the video, but
yes,
we can share that link with everybody.
Yeah, I want to say this is the content. Right now, this process is the content. You experiencing this, you feeling like you're vibing with this, maybe you're not vibing with this is the content. Like you talking about, if you really knew me, that's the whole, this is the process and the racial justice literacy. I want to give a nod to all the professors and all the, we call them femters, all the scholars that went before us. So definitely Paulo Freire, Antonia Darder, Dr. Maramba, she's currently my dissertation chair. Rest in power, Belle, Gloria, Bettina, Tay, rest in peace. Talked about Parker. Any of you doing service learning in the community colleges, you should look up Dr. Hicks Peterson's work. Dr. Solorzano, Dr. Yi out of Cal State Fullerton, and that's my wife. I always gotta give a shout out to my wife, or else I'll hear it later on. No, joking aside, she wrote this beautiful book about being a person of color with her colleague about MFT, training MFTs. So this is my mini projects and trainings I received. I think one that's helpful to name is the National Equity Project. I think I learned a lot of my racial justice literacy really blossomed in that space. We're gonna skip the video for now. I don't wanna call this homework. I'll call it dessert. You can have some dessert after this. Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, you can kind of choose. But one of the things I want you to jot down, if you're writing down strategies, you can write, I noticed, I wonder, and this reminds me of. I know some of you are like, dude, Andre, this is like kindergarten. Yeah, I know, but Harvard Ed Research published this article that this really works, so we all use it. So basically, you watch a video, read a text, look at a quotation, you use the words, I noticed. And it's basically a very open-ended process on Zoom, in person, and different folks can jump in. 3 to 5 people share, and then we move on to the prompt, I wonder. And then 3 to 5 people share, and lastly, this reminds me of. And just kind of a metacognition moment right now for pedagogically, we're doing this because you can kind of see where everybody's coming from, right? All of your students, some of them are really advanced in their racial justice literacy. Others are like questioning, like, why are we talking about this in the classroom? Isn't this about engineering, calculus, political science, blah, blah, blah. So having the I notice, I wonder, this reminds me of, it's not for you to correct the students, but it's more of like you're putting out like a barometer, a pedagogical barometer. Where is everybody at in their own racial justice literacy? I think one of my, I guess I'm just going to share my best, my best pedagogical tips. Anytime I do a presentation or teaching, I always ask the folks to journal, like have some time to themselves. They can doodle, they can put images up, they can write. After that, they always go into like at least pairs, trios, or quads, depending on the context. And then we always share out whole group. So we would have done this watching the video, and then we would have gone through this process. But I think I would really avoid like watching something and then just asking everybody to talk about it, because it's hard to, if people's voices have been silenced for a long time and been undervalued, it's hard for them to step into that space to share their truth and share their awarenesses. And a lot of times for our young folks, like they're actually, as they're talking, they're still thinking about what they want to say. So sometimes they're like verbally processing what they want to say, and it can be difficult. Okay. I think one of the pieces I do want to name is that intersectionality isn't just something that came out 30 years ago from Dr. Crenshaw. Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, there was a whole like lineage, right? And there's this word called like ambiguity citations. People don't really know where like intersectionality came out of. It's definitely from a Black feminist tradition, but there's also a lot of different indigenous or other cultures of color that have also identified with this notion of multiple sections, multiple interlocking systems of oppression. And I just want to offer up some very basic definitions so that there's something that we can kind of hang our pedagogical hat on. Intersectionality is a theoretical framework, meaning it's a way for analysis. It's an analytical tool. So intersectionality is a theory that helps you analyze the world, that posits that multiple social categories intersect at the micro level, the individual, to reflect the multiple interlocking systems of privilege and oppression at the macro social structure level. So that's a lot. I'll kind of just leave that there. We'll say it differently because I know when teaching undergrads, they always want to ask me to put it differently. So Patricia Hill Collins kind of summarizes this. Intersectionality is examine how both formal and informal systems of power are deployed, maintained, and reinforced through axes of race, class, and gender. And Dr. Crenshaw had this really helpful, like, she offered this nuance about identity that I really want to highlight. I think sometimes as identity, when we think about identity, we think about us as a unit, like the individual. We don't really think about the interpersonal, we don't think about the institutional, and we definitely don't think about the ideological. So she writes, identity isn't simply a self-contained unit. It's a relationship between people and history. It's a relationship between people in communities. And it's a relationship between people and institutions. All of these slides will be made available after the session. So this is just kind of like the tip of the iceberg on intersectionality. Jot down 2 or 3 things that you're taking away from today's session thus far, and then we'll have a closing activity for us. So maybe take about a minute to just jot down. We call them meta moments. All right. So kind of finish up that last thought. Liz, could we break up in groups of 3? And we'll
Sure,
just do
I'll
breakouts in groups of 3 for 5 minutes. And the prompts are, what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about each other? And what did you learn about education? Because our time is limited, you can pick one to share and make sure that you're making space for others to contribute. I know that sometimes we have a lot to offer, so make sure that everybody in the group gets to have some thinking around this. And then so I'll drop this in the chat so you can see it.
All right. Are we ready to open up the rooms?
Yeah. See everybody's beautiful faces. I just want to share one last strategy with you all before we transition, because I know that we want this to be usable knowledge. So let's see if I can grab this. I think one of the key points I really want to highlight for today is that a lot of times we think about the what we want to teach, which is the content. Sometimes we think about the how and the strategies, but we rarely think about the why and the rationale for what we do and why we do. And I think there's definitely like a blank spot or underdeveloped sense of ourselves as identity. Sometimes we teach the way that we were taught, and some of us have been teaching for 10 plus years, decades. And how have you grown in your own pedagogical practice, not just with content and strategies, but awareness of yourself? And I think that's the work that I want to do with faculty all the time is, how do we better understand ourselves so we could better understand our craft, so that we could better understand our content? Earlier, I offered this phrase, maybe invite the students into the classroom as this is a space like a playground, it's a sandbox, it's a pedagogical playground where you can kind of like, figure out what different complexity and content is. But it's also a place where people can play and make mistakes, right? It doesn't have to be so high stakes all the time. I also really want to invite folks to think about, how do you integrate empathy into your classrooms? I always tell the students I'm like facilitating with, this is a lab of empathy. This is for you to connect to yourself. This is a space for you to connect with others, but it's also a space to collect your own forgotten histories. It's a space to connect to the global world, right? So it's not just empathy like intrapersonally and interpersonally, but there's this idea of thinking about it in bigger terms. And the last piece I really want to offer up is like, what can we do? These are the resources that I want to kind of highlight to learn and to share. Again, there's multiple pillars of white supremacy. We're kind of talking about one. I really want to invite folks to check out the article by Barbara Love. She wrote this beautiful piece called The 4 A's of Liberatory Consciousness. And I feel like a lot of times we think about awareness and analysis without doing the action. Other times we do the action and we don't do the accountability. So it's not just about thinking, doing, but it's making sure that when you go out of pocket, you have a village of folks saying, hey, let me check in with you about what you just said, Andre, because all of us are still learning. And like, even though we have expertise, there's still going to be moments when we might make mistakes, right? So there's a handful of resources I'll just want to amplify. This is the one about liberatory consciousness. This is one that if you want to share with a colleague who wants to do this work but doesn't know where to start, this is a great article, a blog post by UIC's social work program. It's a diversity toolkit. And I think this is a really helpful space to kind of start interrogating or troubling and problematizing our own identities. If you want to do a more advanced heavy lifting, Bell Hooks has a piece that's also really helpful. So just a big idea to remember, intersectionality, when you think about that word, the different word bubbles that you should pop up, it's identity, power, privilege, and interlocking systems of oppression. I learned this from one of my graduate students. He did this with his second grade class, and I love it. We call it the CATS closing. So at the end of every session, we do CATS. You can talk about one of these pieces: connections, affirmations, thank yous, or shout outs. Connections, affirmations, thank yous, and shout outs. So it always feels good to look at baby animals. So we just want to offer up a little bit of time for CATS.
I'll just like to affirm the work that you've done and all of our peers have done here, and all the thoughtful intentionality and the sharing. I deeply appreciate it, and I feel good. Our semester is about to begin, and I feel empowered going into my spring semester.
Yeah, Andrea, as I mentioned before, I just want to thank you for being here and encourage you to stay on the path, right? Your PhD path. Don't let those naysayers, don't let them piss on your dreams. That's what I tell my students, because there's plenty of folks out there doing it. You have to go within yourself and keep asking yourself the big why question. So I send you love and prayers for much success.
Deborah, I just want to say I really felt that. I'm not crying, but maybe on the inside, I really felt that. Don't let people piss on my dreams. Let me grab a Post-it and a Sharpie.
Well, and this has been a great day. The willingness that we're all developing and sharing our strengths, our weaknesses, our barriers, our stealth maneuvers, it's building. And for that, thank you all for putting this together. Thank you, Andre, especially.
So I know that we're at time, and at the end of every session and at the end of every class I teach or offering, I always say that there's tea time, optional tea time afterwards, and people can grab their bobas or their kombuchas or non-alcoholic drinks. I'm not checking because they're at home, but we just hang out for the last 5-10 minutes and just sharing about we can talk about what happened in the session. We can talk about anything. So for those of you who are able, I just want to invite you to really check out the survey that Una is dropping for feedback. It's really helpful for us to know what went well, what could be better, what resonated with you. Thank you for offering me space for me to share my truth. It's definitely healing for me to come full circle as a former community college student, being a community college adjunct, and now being able to share some insights with community college faculty. So thank you for letting me be part of this community.